So, welcome to this short podcast. My name is Neil McWilliams, and I'm a lecturer and program leader at KCB Global. And I've been involved in the delivery of the CGI, study for CGI exams, for over 35 years. And here at KCB, I lead the classes for the corporate governance module.
And I'm Buff Cooper, and I lead the lectures at KCB for the development of strategy and risk management. Neil and I live in the same village in Surrey, and we regularly meet in our local coffee shop, Adriano's, where we discuss all things CGI students. We were recently having a chat about the key factors involved in passing the CGI examinations, and we thought it would be good to deliver this over a couple of podcasts. Now, the first podcast is going to be about Part 1 exams, which Neil will be covering, and the second one will focus on the Part 2 exams, which I will be covering. Now, Neil, let's discuss the key factors in passing the Part 1 exams. I know that you have helped prepare literally thousands of CGI students over the years in their Part 1 examinations. I also know that you have delivered a number of webinars and discussed the three key factors with the tutors at KCB. So let's get into the detail and kick off with the first key factor.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Buff. So, the first key ingredient in passing the CGI exam is not going to be a surprise. It's that students need a strong knowledge and understanding across the syllabus, right? So, but I think it's worth discussing it in a bit more detail. So, look, it's very tough, especially with the volume of knowledge. The CGI study texts are between 250 and 350 pages. So, look, retaining that knowledge, as we know, is a big undertaking, and it's often mistaken by students as actually the only factor in passing the exam. So, students tend to, focus all their efforts on learning the study text. But what is just so important is that this approach is balanced with other factors that we're going to go on to discuss.
Yes, Neil, there's more to passing the exam than just knowing the theory and content of the syllabus.
I mean, Buff, do you remember the film The Karate Kid, like the original 80s version, Buff?
Yes, I do. You're really showing our age now, Neil.
So, look, in the in that film, do you remember Mr. Miyagi was teaching a young boy karate, right? And he had him painting fences and waxing cars. And the boy, do you remember, complained at just how mundane the work was, became absolutely demoralized. And Mr. Miyagi, went on to explain about how important it was in developing the muscle memory.
Yes, I do.
And for me, it's the same for the CGI exams. Right? Being able to commit the knowledge to memory is important. Right? It can be really tough. It can be so mundane, but it's what is really required in preparing for what the CGI continues to use, the unseen closed book examination. And look, I'm not a psychologist, so I don't have too much understanding of of how the brain works. But I do think there's two types of memory: a short-term and a long-term memory. Right, and to perform on examination day, right, the majority of your knowledge is going to come from that long-term memory. So, in my opinion, the best way of getting knowledge into your long-term memory is through continuing to reaffirm that knowledge over, a sustained period. So, not cramming the week ahead of the exam at all.
Yeah, the importance of that long-term memory is key, Neil, isn't it? And as you say, this is why it's so important that students do not start too late in their studies. It's no good cramming it all in the last few weeks before the exam. So what we generally see, indeed, is happening at the moment in our classes is what I term as the week 3 blues. This is when students feel overwhelmed by the volume of knowledge they're required to learn. And I completely understand that. Students will also feel a sense that they are not learning, what they're learning is not sticking. And I think that the realization of the volume of learning and the difficulties of it sticking is actually a good thing. Why do I say that? Because it leads to students developing strategies and activities that best suit their learning style.
Yeah, I think you're right, Buff. And KCB, one of those strategies is that we try to break knowledge into, understandable chunks and lists. We develop acronyms. For example, for the principles of good governance, there's we use the acronym RAFT, RAFT. Responsibility, accountability, fairness, and transparency. And look, there's a whole host of lists, but I think my point is it's about developing the personal strategies that are going to work best for you. And one of those again for me is about knowledge tests. So KCB, in all of the modules we produce knowledge tests for each area, but there's plenty in the study manual as well. So, from my view, continual knowledge testing is vital. Not only to demonstrate understanding of that knowledge, but also it becomes clear about what knowledge you're missing.
Yeah, great thoughts, Neil. Listen, we appreciate, don't we, that all students are unique in their approach to study and the mix of learning techniques that they may use. But as we mentioned earlier, an early start is a key driver, whatever methods they use.
Yeah, and just thinking about those methods. I mean, you and I both know, a particular students who produce knowledge cards, right, and place those, post-it notes, on their fridge. And by the time they came to the exam, they'd extended those post-it notes to kitchen appliances, cupboards, right throughout the kitchen. And so and also, we've seen students, now increasingly using tools whereby they're going to change the slides into audio files and, listen to those multiple times.
Yeah, audio is an excellent method of learning and memory retention. I know students who have recorded sections of the syllabus in their own voice. They then listen to this in the car on the way to work, and some even listen to it when they go to bed to send themselves to sleep.
Oh my God, Buff. No. I mean, I'm already feeling for the poor partners of our CGI students. Can you imagine, every time all they want to do is get a glass of milk. They've opened the fridge door. There's post-it notes everywhere. Now it's getting to a point when they can't even go to bed without listening to the module. So yes, my heartfelt for the partners of CGI students.
Yeah, brilliant. So Neil, I know you've developed the 40-20-40 approach to CGI exam preparation that all of the lecturers use at KCB. Now, how does that fit into this first factor in developing the knowledge?
So yeah, I'm absolutely right, Buff. We use the 40-20-40 approach, which involves us recommending that 40% of students' time is spent developing and testing the knowledge, and then 20% of study time is developing that deeper understanding and how this knowledge may be practiced and tested in the examinations. And then finally, we commit the remaining 40% of our time to practicing examination questions.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. And I think it's important that the students note here that we place just as much importance on learning the content as we do for exam practice.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it kind of fits in with the more the second and third important factors that I'm going to discuss to succeed in the CGI exams. But before I just discuss them, I just think it could be worth just discussing the question of study time, right? Because it is a question that students asked us very often, and that is, how many hours do we need to spend studying to pass the CGI exam? And it's worth, I think, pointing out that the CGI recommends 200 hours per module. Now, look, that's going to be contextual. right? It's going to be based on a range of factors, such as, whether you have got any existing module knowledge, based on maybe the work that you do, how easy you find memorizing things, and for me, definitely, it's taking me much longer to memorize things, as I'm getting older.
Neil, stop talking about how old we are, right? Listen, of course, age is a factor, and this cannot be overlooked. Our older students, I think, to be fair, they generally struggle with memory retention and may require more study hours. But basically, they need to plan for that.
Yeah, but I think, as a minimum, I still believe that the minimum study time for a module is somewhere between 120 and 150 hours, right? And that's the minimum. So, a semester is somewhere between 12 and 16 weeks. And that depends on whether it's the spring or the autumn, a semester. And of course, in those weeks leading up to the exam, you're going to undertake, significantly more study time, right? At this moment, for the forthcoming exam in June, we're about 10 weeks away from the exam, and students should be committing, in my opinion, to at least 5 hours of study per week. And of course, some students will undertake evening classes, and you can factor that into to that time. But what is important, in the study hours in that 40-20-40 approach, so if you take that minimum of 120, you're going to need to spend about 48 hours, developing and testing your knowledge, and the same amount again in practicing examination questions.
Thanks, Neil. That's really insightful. I particularly like your thoughts on the minimal study time. So, listen, what is the second factor to examination success?
Yeah. So the second important factor is the application of knowledge to the examination question. And again, I think, this sounds, rather simple, but look, the important point is answering the question that is set, right? And surprisingly, when I sat on the professional standards committee for the Chartered Governance Institute for a number of years, and I used to check the answer scripts from students across the different divisions, but I've always been surprised at how much student ignored the question and wrote just a generic answer on everything that they'd learned about the area.
So they are basically overlooking the application of the knowledge, or that 20 part of the 40-20-40 now.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you know what? I really understand it. I understand that a student has spent a lot of time learning, right? And they want to set it out on the exam paper. But sadly, within the 3 hour exam, right, you're only ever going to be writing a small proportion of what you've learned. So, then just looking, at the section B questions, in particular within the Part 1 modules, right? All of those, right, are based on a scenario. So when I talk about the application of knowledge to the examination question, right, what I think is interesting is in those scenarios, the examiner doesn't provide red herrings, right? So what it means is that all the points that the examiner sets out in the scenario are relevant, right? And it's really important that they should be considered and used as part of your examination answer.
Yeah, it's a common mistake, isn't it? And I think one of the examiner's consistent advice for those that do not pass is that the students ignore the clear signposts in the question. And sometimes students just need to state the obvious because there are plenty of easy marks for doing that. I mean, I tell my students, do not assume the examiner knows what you are thinking in your head. Lay out your answer like you're dealing with a 4-year-old.
Yeah, but I think that you are absolutely right. I think that our sometimes students do need to actually state the obvious, and as you say, plenty of marks for doing it, and quite often that's overlooked. When I think about the examiner buff, the examiner's looking for how you're applying that knowledge to the question, right? And they're actually they're willing the students to provide the answers. They want to be able to award the marks. So look, my kind of tips for this is using an approach whereby you're breaking the questions down into parts, right? And for each part, address the specific requirement of the question in relation to the scenario. So for every knowledge point that you make, link it back to the scenario, right? And that might be just using the names. So if you're provided with the name of the company secretary or others in the scenario, you've got to regularly name check them, right, to demonstrate to the marker that you are linking your points to the scenario, right? And then after you've answered the questions, read the scenario question again to ensure that you've used all the key points within the scenario.
That's brilliant, Neil. I love that. Listen, let's talk about the third and final factor, and of course, my favourite subject, exam technique.
Yes, absolutely, Buff. Exam technique. So, the question is what represents good exam technique? And of course, that could be a subject of its own podcast. And Buff, you know what? We should probably consider a podcast just dedicated to exam technique.
Definitely.
So look, we've already discussed answering the question that's set. So, and this is important, right? It's about not straying into other areas.
Yeah, Neil, you're talking about going down that rabbit hole, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And other important techniques is just simple ones like using the format requested in the question. So, if the question states, I give an example, you are the company secretary and the chairman has requested a briefing note, then, use the format, to the chair from the company secretary, reference, briefing note on, I don't know, XYZ. So it doesn't need to reflect necessarily how you would, write a briefing note at work, for example, but it just needs to demonstrate to the marker that you have understood the requirements of the question, right? And that's going to give you, a valuable mark in your answer.
Yeah, it's easy marks now, isn't it? Easy marks.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think other important points in developing examination technique is introducing your answer. Right? So maybe with a short introductory sentence. So maybe that involves providing the underpinning regulation. So if a question relates, I don't know, to the role of the company secretary in supporting the non-executive directors, you might write something along these lines. The company secretary plays a key role in the governance of the company. Provision 16 of the UK Corporate Governance Code states that all directors should have access to the advice of the company secretary, who is responsible for advising the board on governance matters, right? And you're going to be awarded 2 marks for that. And something else, what I just mentioned is about you should then link that introduction back to the issues within the scenario. So yeah, really, really important.
Yeah, an introduction is so important. For me, I try and get my students to understand it sets the tone for the marker that you know the subject area and what you're planning on covering in your answer. And it only needs to be 1 or 2 sentences to score some easy marks.
Yeah, I think it comes back to the point we're talking about, taking the examiner on a journey, right? The examiner they're human. Right? They enjoy reading good answers. We've already said, they want to award marks. They're willing the students to pass. So, that well-constructed answer is making it enjoyable for the examiner is key.
Yeah, make it enjoyable read for the marker. Absolutely, Neil. And also, writing style is so important. Do it well, and you're going to score plenty of marks.
Yeah. So look, I suppose that then the final point in developing your examination technique is about managing your time effectively. So often as tutors, we hear students telling us they didn't manage to finish the exam, and sometimes, but they didn't even manage to complete a whole answer. So managing time just crucial.
Yeah, that whole answer that's missed is fundamental, isn't it? For me, time management is number one on the list of exam techniques. Think about it. If you only answer 75% of the paper, the pass mark jumps from 50% to 67. So it's paramount that students complete all the questions using good time management.
Wow. Yeah, good point. And look, at, at its most simple, right, students should just divide the 3 hours of the exam by the number of questions, right, that they're going to be required to complete. So, and if for those part one exams, if you then count, the that section A, the short answer questions just as a single question for the purposes of the time, because they represent the same number of marks as those section B questions. Look, it you could then, it's just a simple, splitting your time across those questions. But then there's that question of, do you spend more time on questions that you feel more comfortable in writing? Right? And I understand that, but the real danger is that you end up spending too much time and then not leaving yourself enough time for those later questions. So I really do worry about students using that approach.
Yeah, I totally agree, Neil. Well, listen, this has been really insightful. As we both know, past examination papers are a brilliant resource. Through practice, students get to really develop all three of the factors that you've been talking about today. Number one, ensuring the knowledge of the syllabus and continuing to reaffirm this and getting it into that long-term memory. Number two, learning to apply the knowledge correctly to the exam. And number three, ensuring your examination technique is strong and you have practiced previous exam questions. So when you arrive on exam day, there are no surprises.
Thanks, Bob. So, look, I hope that this has provided students with some good advice in preparing for the exam. We, as always, have enjoyed delivering a podcast. Buff, I'm guessing that we will be catching up for coffee later this week. And in the meantime, I wish all of the students the good luck in their studies over the coming week. And we look forward to speaking to you again soon. So thank you very much.